The last bell had rung, but the air still smelled like sweat and chlorine. It clung to my skin, even after the water from the showers had run down the drain. Most of the guys had already left, laughing, shouting, slamming locker doors, their voices fading into the hallway. But not him. Ethan was still there. I had noticed the way he lingered after swim practice the past few weeks. Not enough to make it obvious, but enough to catch my attention. The others would grab their bags and go, leaving the benches empty, the tiled walls echoing with nothing but the hum of the ventilation fans. And there Ethan would be, sitting on the edge of the bench, peeling off his swim cap slowly, like he had nowhere to be. That day was no different, except for one thing. I didn't leave either. Maybe it was on purpose. Maybe I told myself I was just organizing my locker or checking my phone. But the truth was, I wanted to see what happened when the two of us were the only ones left. The silence between us was heavy at first, filled only with the metallic click of my locker door and the muffled squelch of his wet towel being stuffed into his bag. I kept stealing glances at him. His damp hair falling in messy strands over his forehead, the curve of his shoulders, the way his lips pressed together in concentration as he dug through his bag. "You're not heading out?" I asked, pretending to sound casual. He looked up. "Nah, got some time to kill." I nodded, shutting my locker a little too slowly. "Yeah, me too." It should have ended there, two guys killing time before going home. But the air between us had shifted, subtly, like we'd both silently agreed not to rush whatever this was. He sat back against the wall, stretching his legs out, his bare feet brushing the edge of my bench. "You swim good today," he said, his voice quieter now, almost shy. I chuckled. "Thanks. You too. You were flying on that last lap." "Yeah. Well," he shrugged, eyes darting down. "Helps when you're chasing someone." I don't know if he meant me. I wanted to ask, but my chest felt tight, like the wrong question would shatter the moment. The hum of the ventilation filled the pause. Water dripped from somewhere near the showers, each drop echoing against the tile. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. And then, without looking up, he said, "You ever just not want to leave?" I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" "Like, you know you should, but you don't. 'Cause maybe where you are feels better than where you're going." I froze. He still wasn't looking at me, but something about the way his voice cracked on the last word told me this wasn't just about staying late after practice. "Yeah," I said softly. "I know what you mean." Finally, his eyes met mine, and in them I saw it, loneliness. The kind I recognized because I carried it too. We didn't speak after that. Not for a while. He just leaned back, his head resting against the wall, and I found myself sitting down across from him. It wasn't planned, but it felt right. Like maybe we'd been moving toward this moment for longer than I realized. I could hear his breathing, slow and steady. I could see the way his fingers tapped absently against his thigh, like he was holding something in. And then he said it. "My parents are splitting up." The words dropped between us like a stone in still water, rippling through the air. I swallowed. "I'm sorry." He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't be. It's been coming for a while." I wanted to ask if he was okay, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, letting him fill the silence if he wanted to. And he did. "They don't even fight anymore," he said. "It's just cold. Like everyone's waiting for it to be over so we can all stop pretending." The sound of his voice cracked something open in me, and before I knew it, I was telling him things I hadn't told anyone. About how I hated going home some nights because it felt like my dad was always disappointed in me. About how the pool was the only place I didn't feel like I had to prove something. Ethan listened, really listened, his eyes fixed on me like what I was saying mattered. And maybe that's why I didn't notice how close we'd gotten until I could see the flecks of green in his irises. Neither of us moved for a long time. The locker room smelled faintly of chlorine and soap, and the air was thick with something else now. Something I didn't have a name for yet. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I like it better when it's just us here." My throat went dry. "Yeah, me too." And in that moment, I swear, the world outside could have disappeared and I wouldn't have cared. the hum of the fans, the faint drip of water, his gaze holding mine like he didn't want to let go. I knew something had shifted, and I knew we weren't just talking about the locker room anymore. The thing about moments like that is they don't announce themselves. There's no dramatic music, no sudden realization that you've crossed an invisible line. It's just one breath and then another, and suddenly you're standing or sitting in a different world than the one you woke up in. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. Do you ever feel like you can't talk to anyone? Like even if you tried, they wouldn't get it? I nodded slowly. Yeah, more than I'd like to admit. He gave a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. Guess that's why I stay behind. Feels easier here. Quieter. No one watching. I wanted to tell him that I watched him, that I noticed the way he stayed, the way he avoided the chaos of the hallways. But the words caught in my throat, because saying them out loud felt like tipping over a glass I wasn't ready to clean up. Instead, I asked, "You ever wish you could just disappear for a while?" His eyes flicked up, sharp and curious. All the time. That landed between us in a way that made me wonder just how much of what he was saying was a joke and how much was real. I knew that feeling too well, wanting to step out of your own life like it was a shirt you could shrug off. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly down the hallway outside. Neither of us moved. Whoever it was passed without coming in, and the quiet returned, heavier than before. "I think I'd missed this," he said finally. "This?" I echoed. "Yeah." His gaze drifted over the empty benches, the lockers, the damp floor tiles. The stillness. "You." That last part hit me like a kick to the chest. I almost asked if I'd heard him right, but his eyes were on me again, and I knew I had. The thing is, I'd thought about him before, more than I should have. The curve of his back as he dove in. The way his laughter carried across the pool deck. The way he pushed his hair back after swimming, droplets clinging to his skin. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I was just noticing the way you notice the weather. But sitting there, with the smell of chlorine in the air and his voice so close I could feel it, I knew I'd been lying to myself. He shifted, his knee brushing mine. It was light, accidental maybe, but neither of us pulled away. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I laughed softly, though my heart was hammering. "You don't want to know." His lips curved just slightly. "Try me." I hesitated, and in that hesitation, something strange happened. I realized I trusted him. Not because we'd known each other forever, not because he'd earned it in some grand way, but because in that moment, he felt like the only person in the world who might understand. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I like it better when it's just us here too." We held each other's gaze a little too long after that. Long enough that my chest started to ache. Not from fear, but from wanting to close the space between us. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back, trying to break the tension before it broke me. "You gonna tell Coach you've been hiding out here after practice?" He smirked. "Only if you tell him too." It was such a small thing. A shared joke, a shared secret, but it rooted itself in me, deeper than I expected. The conversation shifted after that, drifting from small things. Music we liked, movies we hated, to the kind of things you only tell someone when the rest of the world is far away. He told me how he'd always felt like the extra in his family, the one who didn't quite fit. I told him how I'd been hiding parts of myself for so long I wasn't sure I'd recognize the real me anymore. At some point, the hum of the ventilation seemed to fade, and the only sound I could hear was his voice. "I don't think I've ever told anyone this," he said, his tone quieter now. "But sometimes I wish someone would just see me, like really see me. Not the swimmer, not the guy in the back of class. Just me." I swallowed hard. "I see you." His eyes widened just slightly, and something unspoken passed between us then. Something that made my skin feel too tight, my heartbeat too loud. The truth was, I did see him, and I wanted him to see me too. Not the version I showed everyone else, but the one that stayed behind in the locker room because it felt safer here than anywhere else. We didn't move for a long time after that. And when we finally stood to leave, it was with the quiet understanding that something had started. We just didn't know what it was yet. The next few days, practice felt different. Not in a way anyone else would notice, Coach still barked times, the water was still cold when you dove in, and the chatter in the locker room was still loud and messy. But underneath all that noise, there was something new. Every time I looked up from the pool, I caught Ethan glancing my way. Not in a staring kind of way, but in the quick, stolen seconds between sets. And every time it happened, something inside me sparked, like a match struck in the dark. After practice, he didn't always wait. Sometimes he'd leave with the others, towel slung around his shoulders, laughing at something one of the guys said. But other days, more than before, he lingered. And when he did, I lingered too. The second time we stayed behind, it was raining outside. Heavy rain, the kind that made the parking lot look like a shallow pond. The sound of it pounding against the roof mixed with the metallic clinks of locker doors. When the last of the team filed out, Ethan sat on the bench, tying his sneakers slowly. "Guess I'm not in a rush," he said, glancing toward the door. "Good," I said before I could stop myself. He smiled small, but it reached his eyes this time. "Thought maybe you'd leave me hanging. Not a chance." We talked about nothing at first. The rain, the stupid motivational posters Coach had hung up, the way the vending machine always ate your money. But beneath it all was that same quiet charge, that same sense that we were circling something neither of us wanted to name yet. At one point, a bolt of thunder cracked so loud it made the lockers rattle. I flinched, stupidly, and Ethan laughed. "Not a storm guy, huh?" I shook my head, grinning. "Not when it's that close." He leaned back, stretching his arms. "Guess it's a good thing we're inside." Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten. Like inside didn't just mean the building. The conversation slowed after that. Not in a bad way, just in the way it does when you're comfortable enough with someone to let the silences be. He sat there scrolling through his phone, and I sat on the bench opposite him, pretending to dry my hair but really just watching him. And then he said it. "You ever think about what people don't know about you?" It was such an open question, and I could have kept it surface level. Could have said something about dumb habits or embarrassing secrets. But instead, the truth slipped out before I could catch it. "Yeah, all the time. Like, the most important parts." He looked up at me then, really looked, like he was searching for something in my face. Me too. The rain kept pounding the roof. My heartbeat felt just as loud. "What's one of yours?" I asked quietly. He hesitated, eyes dropping to the floor. His voice, when it came, was soft enough I almost didn't hear it. "I like guys." The words hung there, heavier than the humid air. My breath caught. Not because I was shocked, but because I'd been waiting, hoping, maybe even needing to hear it. I wanted to say something right away, but the way he kept his gaze down made me realize how much it had cost him to say it at all. "Yeah," I said finally. "Me too." His head snapped up, eyes wide, like he hadn't expected that answer. And then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not a smirk, not a forced grin, just something real. The space between us felt smaller after that, even though neither of us moved. "You ever told anyone?" he asked. I shook my head. "You?"
No.
And somehow that made it even more powerful. That the first time either of us had said it out loud, it was to each other. In an empty locker room, with the rain drowning out the rest of the world. For a long time we just sat there, both of us processing the fact that the other knew now. And it felt lighter. Not easy, not simple, but lighter. When we finally left, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. We walked out together, our steps matching without trying. We didn't say goodbye at the parking lot. Just a glance, a small nod. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying it. His voice, my answer, and the way everything seemed different now. Because it was. The third time we stayed behind, it wasn't planned at all. It was a Thursday, the kind of day where everyone seemed to be rushing home. Coach had cut practice short because of a staff meeting, and most of the guys practically sprinted out of the locker room the second they were dressed. I was halfway through pulling on my hoodie when I noticed Ethan still at his locker, moving at his usual unhurried pace. "You not heading out?" I asked. He shook his head. "Got nowhere to be." Neither did I, not really. And even if I had, I think I would have found a reason to stay. The air was warmer than usual that day, heavy with the scent of soap and the faint tang of metal from the lockers. Ethan sat on the bench, hair still damp, scrolling through something on his phone. I slid onto the bench across from him, and just like that, it felt like the rest of the world had gone quiet. We didn't jump into deep conversation right away. We never did. It was like we had to let the silence settle first, like water stilling after a dive. After a few minutes, he set his phone down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know how last time I told you I like guys?" My stomach flipped. "Yeah." He hesitated, chewing on the inside of his cheek. "I wasn't sure if I should have said that. I mean, I don't know if you think I was trying to." "I didn't think that," I interrupted, maybe a little too quickly. "I'm glad you said it." Something in his shoulders eased, and the faintest smile tugged at his lips. "Good, 'cause I meant it." "I know." The way we were looking at each other then, it wasn't the kind of look you give a teammate or even just a friend. There was something charged in it, something that made the air between us feel almost electric. I don't know who moved first, but suddenly we weren't just sitting across from each other anymore. I'd shifted forward, and so had he, until we were close enough that I could see the tiny droplets clinging to the tips of his hair. "Can I tell you something else?" he asked, his voice so quiet it barely made it over the hum of the ventilation fans. "Anything. I've thought about this before. Being here, like this." My pulse jumped. Me too. And there it was, out in the open now, the thing we'd been dancing around for weeks. He exhaled, almost like he'd been holding his breath for a long time. "Feels different when it's real." "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "It does." We stayed like that for a while, close but not quite touching, both of us clearly wondering who would break the invisible barrier first. Finally, it was him. His hand brushed mine, just lightly at first, almost testing. When I didn't pull away, he let his fingers rest against mine, warm and steady. The contact sent a rush through me, not because it was some dramatic gesture, but because it was him. We didn't kiss. Not that day. But somehow, that small touch felt just as intimate. Like we'd crossed into new territory and there was no going back. Eventually, we pulled away, both of us pretending we weren't a little reluctant to do it. "You walking out?" he asked, standing and slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Yeah." We left together, the late afternoon sun spilling through the hallway windows. We didn't say anything about what had just happened. We didn't have to. But as we stepped outside, I knew one thing for certain. Something between us had shifted again. And this time, it wasn't going to shift back. By the next week, it was obvious that our staying behind wasn't an accident anymore. It became a rhythm: practice, locker room, wait for the last voices to fade. Then that quiet stretch of time that belonged only to us. Nobody asked questions, or if they did, they kept them to themselves. Maybe it was because we didn't make a big deal out of it in public. Maybe it was because teenage boys are too wrapped up in their own worlds to notice the spaces between ours. That Tuesday, the pool had been especially cold. My skin was still prickled when I pulled on my t-shirt, and the warmth of the locker room felt like stepping into another world. Ethan was at his locker, tossing his towel into his bag, his hair sticking up in damp spikes. He glanced over. "Thought you'd left with the guys." I smirked. "And miss our usual post-practice meeting?" That earned me the grin I'd grown addicted to. Wouldn't want to break tradition. We settled in without ceremony. Me on the bench across from him leaning back against the lockers. The air was thick with the faint scent of chlorine and laundry detergent. For a while, we just talked. About classes. About how coach had been in a bad mood since the last meet. About a stupid rumor going around about two people in our year making out in the art room after school. And then he got quiet. Not the normal comfortable quiet we'd learned to sit in, but something heavier. "What?" I asked, tilting my head. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You ever think about what happens if someone finds out about us?" The word "us" caught me off guard, even though it shouldn't have. We hadn't defined anything, hadn't labeled it, but hearing it from him made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't describe. "Yeah," I said honestly. "I think about it. And," I let out a slow breath, "I guess, I think it's worth it." He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to figure out if I meant it. I did. People talk, he said finally. They do, I agreed. They'll make it a big thing. They might. A pause. Then, quieter. Doesn't scare you? I swallowed. Scares the hell out of me. But losing this would scare me more. Something in his expression softened then, and before I realized it, he'd shifted forward. We were only a foot apart now, and I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Can I? He started, then trailed off. I didn't make him finish. This time I closed the gap. It wasn't like in movies. There was no dramatic swell of music, no perfect camera angle. It was tentative at first, nervous, searching, until it wasn't. Until the hesitation melted and all I could think about was the warmth of his mouth and the way his hand cupped the side of my neck like he'd been wanting to do it for a long time. When we pulled back, both of us were breathing a little harder. His forehead rested against mine for a second before he pulled away, a faint, almost disbelieving smile on his lips. Guess we broke tradition, he said. Guess we did. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. When we finally left the locker room, the hallway outside felt louder and brighter than usual, like stepping back into a world that didn't know what had just happened. But I knew, and so did he. And from that moment on, staying behind wasn't just something we did, it was ours. The next few days were a blur. It wasn't like we suddenly became a couple in public. Far from it. We still acted the same around the team, still kept our conversations in the safe territory of workouts, homework, and weekend plans. But under the surface, something had shifted, and I could feel it in every glance, every brush of his shoulder against mine in the hallway. After our first kiss, I thought maybe things would get awkward. They didn't. If anything, the opposite happened. The space between us felt easier, warmer, like we'd both stopped pretending not to see the thing that had been right there all along. That Friday, practice ran late. By the time we hit the showers, half the guys were already gone. I took my time, letting the hot water wash away the sting of chlorine from my skin. When I stepped out, Ethan was already dressed, leaning against the lockers, scrolling on his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. You waiting for me? I asked, grabbing my towel. He didn't look up, but I saw the smirk tug at the corner of his mouth. Maybe. I threw on my hoodie and dropped onto the bench beside him. The hum of the ventilation was steady, the air still carrying that faint mix of soap and damp wood from the benches. You know, he said, tucking his phone away, if we keep staying behind like this, people are going to think something's up. They might not be wrong, I said, my voice lower than I meant it to be. That made him laugh. A soft, real laugh that warmed my chest more than I cared to admit. Guess I'm okay with that. It was such a simple thing to say, but it stuck with me. Okay with that. We talked for a while, our legs brushing now and then, until the sound of footsteps echoed from down the hall. Both of us went quiet, listening. The door didn't open, and the footsteps faded away, but it left my heart beating faster all the same. Ethan must have noticed because he leaned in, his voice dropping just above a whisper. Still scares you? I thought about lying, about saying no, about pretending I was braver than I was. But the truth was, yeah, it scared me. Yeah, I said finally. Me too, he admitted. But, he hesitated, eyes flicking to mine. Doesn't mean I don't want it. The way he said it, steady, certain, hit me somewhere deep. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. There was a different kind of closeness in just sitting there, knowing we'd both chosen to be here in this moment over and over again. When we finally walked out, the hallways were dark except for the emergency lights. The school felt like it was holding its breath. At the doors, he paused before pushing them open. Tomorrow, after practice. I didn't even pretend to think about it. Yeah, I'll be here, and I knew I would, no matter what. The days that followed were a slow unfolding, like the first warm rays of spring breaking through a long winter. Every time we stayed behind, the locker room became more than just a place where we left our bags or changed out of swimsuits. It became ours, a sanctuary from everything else. There, the noise of the outside world faded into background static. There, we could be honest without the fear of judgment or whispers. One evening, after practice, the locker room was nearly empty. The flickering fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Ethan was already seated on the bench, scrolling through his phone when I walked in. "Hey!" I said, dropping my bag beside him. He looked up, a small smile touching his lips. "Hey!" We settled into the quiet rhythm, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. After a moment, he asked, "Do you ever think about what it means?" Together. I thought about it carefully. "Sometimes. I guess I'm still figuring it out." He nodded. "Me too." The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. Here was someone who felt just as uncertain, just as scared, just as hopeful. I reached out, my fingers brushing the back of his hand. He didn't pull away. "That's what makes it real," I said softly. "Not the certainty, but the willingness to try anyway." He squeezed my hand, his eyes meeting mine in a look that said more than words ever could. From that night on, we stopped pretending the locker room was just a place to hang out. It was where everything started. We stayed behind because there we were free. Free to laugh, to cry, to hold each other when the weight of the world got too heavy. Free to be us. And everything changed.